Hi everyone, and welcome to the 30th Daily Critique. Now's time to announce the most recent print winner. So PhotoSpeed, a local fine art paper company, have offered a free print to a person of my choosing. It's supposed to happen every week, but because these last videos have been somewhat staggered, I haven't quite managed that. But the most recent winner is Eugene Theron. I really enjoyed looking through his images, and particularly one shot taken, I think, in Snowdonia that was particularly beautiful. So well done, Eugene. You are the winner this time around. And today we are going to discuss the work of Stewart Hunt and 5 images taken in the Drakensberg on a workshop with me, in fact. Stewart has quite a warm editing style, and so we're going to use that as an opportunity to discuss white balance and why I tend to choose colder white balances, and why I think that will generally make for better images. So let's get started. So these are Stewart's images from the Drakensberg, and Stewart's actually been with me on quite a few trips to Iceland and the Drakensberg and Scotland. So I've come to know him quite well, and it's nice to see his photography has improved as well, so that's even better. But there are a few things to maybe bring up with some of these images, but broadly I think they're very successful. So I've just opened them up in Photoshop, and what I'm going to do is talk through the compositions and some ideas specific to each shot, and then I'm going to do the second part of the video is going to be discussing white balance and why it's important to get it right. So let's start here. This is maybe the most dramatic view in all of the Drakensberg, the Umbundini Abbey, and made even better by this hailstorm coming down, and I guess dousing out the smoke here. The Zulus live down in these valleys, and these hills are grazed. Fire does occur naturally there, but they tend to set off fires when there's a lot of dry grass around so that it will regrow, and they can graze their cattle more easily. So that's what that smoke is down there, almost certainly, although they shouldn't really be burning at this time of year, but there you go. And we've got this lovely framing here. So, I mean, I think that's one of the best aspects of this view, is that you have these nicely balanced cliffs on both sides, and then framed in the middle we have all this wonderful hail coming down, and then the jagged ridge, the Nwene Needles and Rockery's tower there. It's really quite something to stand there. And I think this captures the view pretty brilliantly. Incidentally, I didn't photograph this scene myself simply because I found the smoke too annoying, and I do have that experience here, to be honest. Although I guess as an image of how people live their lives in the Drakensberg, it's quite an interesting detail because it's including that human influence. So other than the white balance issue, which we'll come into in a bit, I think this is very well edited. The contrasts and brightnesses are pretty well handled. There's a little bit of underexposure in the foreground, so setting white points, which I can just do very quickly here. For that foreground, we'll just start to lift the colours. So if you ignore what's happening, well, in fact, let's mask it, why not? If you do something like that, very crude at the moment, but you can see how that just helps the colours shine through there if you just set that white point in the foreground. Okay, on to this image, which is actually of the same features here, but taken from up here. So we hiked around there. So this is the Nwene Needles, and we had a really nice afternoon there with thunderstorms coming through in the distance, and some interesting rays. These are actually called anti-crepuscular rays. So they're all converging on the anti-solar point, which I guess would be somewhere here. So rays coming from the sun are crepuscular rays. Rays coming away from the sun are anti-crepuscular rays. So you don't see those so often, but if you know to look for them, they are there. And these wisps of cloud are really nice as well. They give a bit of a sense of scale and wonder to the crags. Again, maybe the white balance is slightly off, but other than that, I think the edit is very good. and there's a good crop here too, because there's some blue sky out of the frame, which I think it was a good choice to crop out. And the asymmetry and balance actually works really nicely. So you've got the rays coming down here, which is subtle. I mean, it'd be better if they were stronger. The mountains there on the left, and I think this crag here also balances well. So it all fits together actually very nicely. And incidentally, the shadows are at about the perfect level of brightness there. So you know they're deep shadows, but there's plenty of detail. Okay, on to this image. Bit of underexposure. I guess the highlights in the sky are there. Let's have a look. Yeah, so not quite. So that's the highlights in the sky popping in. So at the very least, maybe something like that. But I would also set a white point for the foreground. You can see just how much that lifts. So it looks kind of underexposed. Now, if you just mask out the highlights, which I would do with the grad here, then not that badly, then yeah, something like that's about right. We have another white balance issue. But other than that, amazing conditions. I quite like the centrally placed mountain here. In fact, I don't need to draw on that, do I? That's rather obvious. I would say that if you lose a little bit off the right there, then it becomes a bit more centralized and perhaps a little better balanced. And you could even lose some of this foreground just to make more of the mountain in the scale of the shot, if you like. I'm not sure that it needs to run almost all the way across the frame like that. So when I show you my edit, which is mostly to make a point about white balance, I've also cropped it like that. Nice illustrative image, this one. I mean, the conditions are incredible. The ridge is amazing. I'm not sure that it says anything particularly interesting to me, and maybe it doesn't have that sense of wildness. It almost looks friendly in a strange way. And perhaps that's me being particular, because I've seen conditions like this in the Drakensberg so many times now. But it's a nice shot. It's well shot. Maybe the edit could be a little better, maybe a bit more contrast. I'm not sure about leaving all of this empty space in the top left there, so I'd probably crop a bit tighter like this, and then to get the balance I would just lose a bit of the foreground cloud as well, so to make it a bit more of a letterbox and focus your attention even more on the ridge. But very well handled, just a lot simpler than the other images. And this is probably my favourite of the bunch. Again, a couple of minor things you could do with the edit. If we look at the raw file, there's actually a rock sticking into the bottom of the frame that Stewart's cropped out. I won't bother showing you that, but what I would say is this bunch of grasses on the right still draws my eye a little bit, and I'd possibly try and get it so that the grasses were coming out of the corner of the frame, and that has the advantage of losing that rock there on the right as well. So I'd also lose a bit off the right hand side there, because I absolutely love these grasses coming out of the foreground here. Little explosions of spiky yellow grass, and there's a nice bush here. I mean, really, it's a beautifully arranged foreground. Lots of nice shapes and textures and colours, and it really adds context to the view, and that's everything that I love about a good foreground there. So really, really strong shot, this one. And it was actually a morning that we thought was a bit hopeless, but it turned out to be quite nice in the end. Yeah, I think we all got a few nice photos from here, but this is a particularly good one, I have to say, and I love all these subtle colours in the sky coming through. Let's talk about white balance, and let's do a really silly example first. So we can see here that there's some oranges in the cliffs and there's some greens in the grasses and so on, and we can see where the shadows and the highlights are. But what about if we did something that we would never do, which is to put a bright yellow painted layer over the top of the image, as if we'd got the white balance wrong, but really, really wrong. So let's say we do something like this. Suddenly it becomes a lot harder to tell what's green, what's orange, what's yellow, what's highlights and what's shadow. And this is kind of the combination that you would get if you got the exposure wildly wrong, although it would kind of be the other way around because it would be darker, and if you got the white balance wrong. I forget what blend mode I'd need to use to, I mean, it's one of these blend modes to give you kind of the idea, but the point is that you start to lose color definition when you put color casts over an image. So you'll lose the color separation because every color is becoming, in this case, more yellow. And so they're actually moving together, not apart. So the reason why color casts are really significant in images is because they can bring colors together. So you lose color depth, you lose separation. I mean, quite commonly you want to have blues going into the distance because it creates a perception of depth that we're all too familiar with, because haze is lit by a blue sky and it creates a blue cast going into the distance. And if you start saying, well, I like warmer white balances, and of course this now looks perfectly normal because my eyes have adjusted to this bright yellow, but if you like warmer white balances, then quite often what happens is you just lose that sense of depth, or you push white balances to colors together. And similarly, if you like really cold images, the same thing will happen. So you want to try and find whatever neutral appears to be. When you have white clouds in an image, they're quite a good cue. You can possibly see that there's warmer colors in these clouds here, despite the fact that it's a long time before sunset. So that can be a bit of a giveaway sometimes. So I will just now take you through my sort of rebalanced versions of these shots, and you can see my edits as well, which I'm not going to go into in any depth. But you can see across the board that I've gone for a colder white balance. So here we start to see a better variation in greens down in the valley. It's harder to make out these apple greens, for example, and you start to see them more clearly when you have that colder white balance. Here, is there any real benefit to it? Well, it certainly pushes the view there backwards, having all these blues in there. So I think you do lose that sense of depth with the warmer white balance here. So there's the benefit there. Here, the sky looks muddy to me, like brown, because it really is too warm. And I think these fresher colours are much better. If you think about it, these clouds that are in shadow down here, they're being lit by a blue sky. And incidentally, I'm not exactly sure why the quality of this is quite so poor. There we go, okay. They're being lit by a blue sky, so they should be fairly blue. They certainly shouldn't be neutral. So that's that one. And on to this ridge view, you can see the highlights stand out more. Now I have added a bit more contrast, and that only accentuates that, but you can see the color difference is much more evident in this second version, which of course is the difference between sunlight on one area of cloud and not on the other. So you get better definition in the cloud because we've set the right white balance. And then finally, this last image, which I haven't yet expanded. I have added more contrast here as well, and changed the crop. I kept some space there on the left and lost some space on the right. But you can see here how this foreground is lovely and warm because we've got all those rich yellows and oranges in the foreground naturally in the rocks and the grasses. But the background, we've got this haze coming in and it's bluer and it looks more distant. So we've generated a sense of depth, even though we've actually improved the contrast, which would actually bring the mountains forward. We've improved the sense of depth through color. So this is why white balance is so important. So you've got your temperature white balance, your blue and your yellow slider, if you like, and then you've got your tint white balance, green and magenta. And it's really important that you try to tune your eye into spotting what neutral is, and it's going to vary with certain scenes. And with some scenes you may want the color cast that the light naturally brings, or you may want to remove it or reduce it. So it's not a rule that is set in stone, and it does require your own decision making, but understanding what white balance can do for your images is very important. It seems super basic and very simple, but it's absolutely critical to images that are full of color and a sense of depth. So thanks for sending those in, Stuart. Sorry that I had to have a crack at you about the white balance issue there, but hopefully you've found it helpful.